Hi, I'm Katie, and today I will be showing you how to embellish an ornament hanger for a super fun, super sparkly, and very easy finish that can bring the sparkle to your sparkle prim. In today's tutorial, I'll be taking you step by step through how to make the embellished ornament hanger that's seen here, but we'll also be discussing sources, methods, and variations on the technique, since I think it has a really wide range of variations and possibilities that I hope you'll explore and share with me what you come up with. The timestamp for where the instruction starts is in the description if you'd like to skip directly to the step-by-step how-to. For this tutorial, you will need an ornament. It's easiest to do this if it's been mounted, but it hasn't been fully finished, so it doesn't have a backing, and there's an easy place to start and stop all of your threads. You'll need something for the hanger, so a cord, a braid, or some kind of trim. You'll need a large chenille needle that works with the size of whatever you're using for your hanger. You'll need a fine sewing thread and a fine finishing needle to use with your sewing thread. You'll need your embellishments, and then you'll also need not your best pair of scissors. If your hanger is anything synthetic, poly rayon, metallic, those can damage your best scissors. So you'll want to use an inexpensive pair that's not your Dovos, your Kahanas, or your best scissors, so you don't damage or nick the blades. To go through specifics here, today I'll be using 103 Soie silk thread to stitch with, and I really like using silk thread for this particular tutorial because silk is an incredibly strong natural fiber. The smoothness of silk makes it much easier to finish with, so if you've never tried silk for finishing, give it a whirl sometime. You'll find that it really makes life a lot easier. But specifically for this application, what you're looking for is the strength. The beads have a really surprising amount of heft and weight to them, and the silk can stand up to that. That's why I would specifically recommend 103. Surfing can be great for finishing more generally, but it won't be able to support the weight of the beads, so you want to use 103. If you've got a spool and stash, whip it out and try it. You might be surprised how much it improves your finishing experience. However, you can use plain cotton sewing thread if that's what you have. And then for your ornament hanger, I'll be using Soie metallic braid, size 8, color number 32, which is a lovely, just lightly lustrously sparkly white braid that goes beautiful with the plain crystals that I'm using here. I love the Soie braid specifically because it's really soft and it's really supple, which makes it so easy to work with, especially here because you're actually stitching through your braid to attach your bead, and it also really hides your stitches, so you'll find that the silk just sinks in to the braid, and then it's almost impossible to see your stitches once you're finished. So that's why I really like to use it. The Soie braid also comes in a really wide range of both sizes and colors. So this is my stash of Soie metallic braid. As many of you already know, I am a complete and utter sparkle hound, so this is my particular brand of crazy on full display. And this is my own collection, so I've got quite a wide color range and also a size range. The sizes range from size 4 to 32. 4 is the finest, and I think it's a little too fine for this technique. I have done it, it's just much more difficult. The 8, which I'm using, I think has enough heft that you can get your needle through it, and I like the delicacy. It really lets the beads star. However, you might prefer something more like a 12 or a 16. They're a little thicker, and it'll be a little easier to take your needle through the center of the braid, especially if your eyesight isn't quite as sharp. I don't have any of the 32 because it's quite thick, so these are really my preferred medium sizes. And Then metallic braid is a really good choice for this technique because, as I mentioned, it really hides your stitches. They sink right into the braid, really effectively disguising them. But it is only one option, and there certainly are other ones. So for example, you could try a silk or polyester cord, a twist, decorative braid or trim, or any other kind of metallic cord or braid that you might have in stash. There are a ton of possibilities here, and I really look forward to seeing what you can find. So go take a look in your stash and see if you have any interesting trim that might be dense enough to support the stitching and the strength needed for this technique. Like I said, I'm all for using what you have, and it's amazing how sometimes you can go into stash and the exact perfect thing that you wouldn't even have known to look for is right there. However, please make sure that you watch the full tutorial before you choose what to use for your ornament hanger, because the technique does put some stress on your hanger. Watch to the end and then consider if what you want to try is going to be able to support the weight and the stitching required. For example, you can't use a silk ribbon for an ornament hanger with this technique because the ribbon would shred both from the stitching and then the weight that the beads put on it. They are remarkably heavy. And then that brings us to the other necessary component, which is embellishments. So for today, I'm going to be using crystal bicone pendants. Those are the same shape as a bicone bead, but they're drilled through the top, which is why we call them a pendant. A bead is drilled through the center, and that's why they hang off the cord like this. For this ornament, I have used 7 of the larger 8mm crystal bicone pendants and 5 of the smaller 6mm pendants. At current retail prices, that would be about $7 for the crystals needed for one ornament, which can really add up if you're doing multiple ornaments. So I do have some suggestions on some more budget-friendly alternatives, but we'll talk about crystals for just a minute more. And I am using bicones because I like how they look like little icicles, especially for a Christmas ornament like this, you know, the Perry School or Santa, it's snow themed. But crystal pendants do come in a really amazing variety of shapes, sizes, and colors. So this is a embroidered Valentine that I made for my mother, and I used color scarlet crystals, and then the pendants here are rounds. And then I also, you'll note, used an ornament hanger with a single attachment point, and the effect that that gives is that the crystals kind of mass together when it's hung up. I actually kind of like spacing it so that you can actually really see them, like I have done on the center, on the Santa here, but that's another possibility to consider. And also you can use this same technique, say at the bottom of an ornament. You could hang a loop off the bottom or individual strands kind of as streamers to get a decorative embellishment to hang off your ornament rather than hang your ornament from. Those are all possibilities. And to note, this is a size 4 braid in use. So I had red in size 4, I didn't have it in size 8, that's why I used it. And you can see that it is definitely finer than the size 8, and so it's harder to find just to take your needle through the center of that. But that's another fun variation, and I really look for, I'm going to be experimenting with all the different things I can do with this. So that's one other style of pendant. The same rounds come in even bigger sizes. So here I've got some nice chunky 10mm rounds to go with an 8. Hoping to do a really blingy ornament with those. And then I've also got some princess cuts, which are squares. A few of you asked about my crystal storage. So for larger beads or where I have a lot of quantity, I like using those clear stackable boxes. For smaller beads and smaller quantities, I use the Darris bead organizer seen here. And these are just little individual plastic jars with screw tops in a box. So these are pears, top drilled pear pendants. So beautiful. I can't wait to try those as well. These are briolettes, so very similar in shape to the pear, but super faceted and so sparkly. Those are all kind of more medium sized, but you can get really big and really blingy with your embellishments if you so desire. So the pears in particular come in some stonking sizes. That is a 16 millimeter pear. So if you want a really chunky, really sparkly, really blingy ornament, you can definitely go there. I hope somebody does. Please share it with me if you do. So those are just some of the possibilities from my own stash, but crystal pendants come in all kinds of shapes, some of them really funky. I'll link to the main page where you can see all the different styles at my preferred retailer. But just point to note is that the more interesting shapes tend to come in a more limited color range. So if you're looking for color, you're probably going to find pairs of briolettes, bicones, and rounds. You won't get the weirdo shapes in too many colors. As I mentioned, the crystal pendants, they are more expensive than the crystal beads of the same size and type. So you could also use beads of really any type for this hanger and stitch those into your hanger. They wouldn't hang off the hanger in the same way. That's why I really like the pendants for it, but they could add lots of texture and sparkle to your finish and would provide an interesting but more cost-effective variation. However, you also don't have to use crystals. I'm a real sucker for sparkle, so I go for that. But you could use all kinds of other embellishments. They don't even have to be pendants. So you could use charms, drops, things that you pull off of vintage jewelry. So you can take apart jewelry found at a thrift store or an antique mall. That can be a really great source for some interesting embellishments. Charms would also be really interesting. So you could use letter or number charms and stitch them into a hanger to spell out a name or a year to commemorate a special person or event. So there are a lot of possibilities with this. They're not all as expensive as larding it up with crystal pendants. And I hope that you'll really get creative and explore all the possibilities out there. There are quite a lot. However, the important point that you always need to consider is take a look at the weight of what you've ended up with. So when you've picked your embellishments, hold them in your hand, think about how much they weigh, and then consider how much strength and heft your ornament hanger needs to have to support that. You'll see why as we get through the instruction in this tutorial. Let's get to the actual demonstration on how to do this ornament. So I'm going to be demonstrating today with two different ornaments. We will start by showing how I do the braid. So for the number 8 metallic braid I have here, I'm just gonna cut off a little length and then pull a large enough chenille needle. So this is a size 22 chenille needle, which I find to be great for the number 8 metallic braid. For the larger sizes, like a 16, you're probably gonna need a 20 or an 18. And this is from my set of needle ID cards. They are available at any LNS and they're really, really useful for identifying your needles because as you can see, I like to just stick a bunch of my most used sizes in felt, keep them in my sewing box, and then every once in a while, like during a tutorial, I need to be able to tell you what I'm actually using. So I have my needle ID cards for that. So I have threaded my braid into my chenille needle, and now I am going to attach my braid to my ornament. So for this, again, this is why it's easier to use one with an exposed back that isn't fully finished yet. I like to go in right at the top So for like a square or rectangle, I want this to be right at the corner. And then I take it just through and down. Don't go through the mat board, just through the linen. And pull that through. Double knot this. It's okay to leave a long tail, you can cut it. And then pull that back up, give it a tug to make sure it's nice and secure. I know knots aren't the most secure thing in the world, but this will be getting reinforced again when I go and slip stitch a backing to the back of this ornament. And when I do that, I make sure to take my stitching through my braid so that it's very securely anchored. And then to do the other side, I'm just going to repeat the process of threading the needle, taking it down at the top quarter, and then coming out towards the center. And then this is where you kind of try and gauge how high do you want your hanger. So I'm gonna say about there. Just gonna pinch that with my finger to know where to put the knot. Knot once. Oh, that doesn't want to knot. Okay, well, it didn't quite knot very well, but it's secure. I pulled on it. And then clip the end. So there I have started my braid. And then the next thing to do is to start my thread. So I'm gonna take a good length of, this is Creme 103. It's a really good color match to the braid that I'm using today. And I am going to put that in one of my number 10 milliner's needles. If you can see, which I really hope you can, this has curved from use. Do not get rid of your finishing needles when they start to do that. That's actually when they are the most useful. A needle that's got some curve to it is actually a lot easier to use in finishing. So this is a straight needle that's just bent a little bit from my fingers. One of the reasons I like milliner's needles so much is they've got a lot of flex to them and they do bend and then they eventually take on some shape. But another really great thing to have for finishing, and we'll be using this in the next ornament tutorial I do, is a curved beading needle. If you're doing anything around the edge with a hard shape, this is your best friend. But just for today's purpose, we're going to use a number 10 milliner's needle. And then I am going to start this down in the linen and come up and work it into the braid. So I've double knotted the end. I'm gonna start on this side. So I'm just going to take a couple of quick tacking stitches in my corner, working up towards where I'm gonna start, which is going to be right here. So I'm going to come up right at where I have started my braid. So I have shown you the process of putting your braid in and starting your thread on this ornament because it didn't have a back, but I want to demonstrate the actual crystal hanger on this Prairie Schooler Santa because it goes so well with the scale of the bicones. So I'm going to pause this, start my thread here by sinking it under my already finished back, and then come right back to you. Okay, so I now have my thread started right at the corner of the braid, just as it was when I finish demonstrating on the other ornament, and then I'm going to start stitching through it to attach my pendants. But there are a couple things you want to consider when you're planning out your ornament hanger. First is, where do you want your pendants to start? Especially if you're using pendants, the entire point of these is that they drop down, so you don't want to put your first one right here. It has nowhere to drop. Does that make sense? So you actually want to start a little further up, and then you also want to consider how dense are your pendants or beads. So how much space do you want between them? How are you clustering them? How are they going to hang? And then where is this ornament going to be used? So for my Prairie Schooler Santas, these are going to go on Christmas trees. That means I've left quite a space here at the top where it's going to be buried in the branch. Why waste an expensive crystal pendant where you can't see it? However, on my mother's embroidered Valentine, I knew that this would hang on a hook in her kitchen, so I went up a little higher. So think about where you're going to use your ornament, how you want your pendants to hang, or how evenly you want to space your beads if you're going to be using beads, and then start accordingly. So what we're going to do is, I've taken my first stitch through the braid, and I'm hoping that this is going to work well on camera. So it's useful to work with one hand and then hold the braid up and taut in the other. That makes this easier to do. So then you're just going to take your needle right through it, pull through, and then just keep going back and forth. This is a little harder to do on camera than it is in life because I can't get my face right up against it. So you always want to be piercing the braid. And the smoothness of the silk is one of the reasons that I really like it for this particular purpose. So if you can see there, my needle has gone right through the center of the braid and it's securely anchored. I like the delicacy of the number 8, but you may want to consider something a little bigger, like a 12 or a 16 that has a little more chunk to it, especially if your eyesight isn't as keen. It will be a little easier to get your needle through the center of a thicker braid. But as I said, I really like the size 8 because it kind of puts the focus on the pendants, but it has enough strength to support them. So I'm going to go through the center again. I'm going to try to, at least, and I'm getting close to where I want to put my first pendant. Let's see. Yeah, I did catch the center. It can occasionally be a little hard to tell. Okay. So now, just give it a tug, make sure everything is nice and secure, and let's attach our first pendant. So I am going to thread on a larger bicone. This is an 8mm. I'm gonna leave that loose just so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just going to go through the braid again in the same spot. And on this, you want to be sure that you're taking a really good bite of the braid. Make sure you're going right through the center so that you're really anchoring your pendant here. Then pull that through. You can leave a little slack in the thread so it has a place to hang. That's actually quite helpful. And then just to make sure that this is really secure, I'm going to go through the top again. And then take another stitch through the braid. Yeah, this is definitely more difficult on camera. So you can never do anything when you've got a camera watching you. It's like performance anxiety or something. So that gives me my first crystal hanging. So that one's standing up quite proud off the hanger. If you'd like a more floppy look, then you can leave some more slack in your stitches, and just always make sure that you're going through each pendant or bead twice to make sure it's securely anchored. And then from there, you're just going to repeat the process of stitching back and forth through the center of your braid. And how close you place your stitches really depends on how, I guess, anal retentive you are. So bigger stitches will be more visible. Smaller stitches will sink better into the braid and be more hidden. However, this is also an ornament hanger, so you're not going to look that closely, and I wouldn't really stress all that much about it. So I'm spacing my stitches reasonably closely together, but nothing too crazy. It doesn't need to be invisible. The effect that you really see is of these beautiful, beautiful pendants and their fabulous sparkle. So I'm going to take a couple more stitches and and try not to catch your existing pendants. That gets to be more of a problem the more of them you have on this, so work carefully. Take one more stitch and then I'm going to add another pendant. And again, as I said, it's easier to place your needle and get through the center of the braid if you're holding the braid taut with one hand. All right, so that's about the distance I've got there. And I am going to thread on a smaller bicone. There's no right or wrong order here, but I really like how these looked. They're like fabulous, sparkly little icicles hanging off my Christmas Santa. So I'm gonna try and essentially just recreate what I've done on that one, but stay tuned to my floss tube this season because I'm definitely going to be experimenting with more variations, and we'll see what I come up with and also what you come up with. I know you guys have a lot of really wonderful creativity, and I can't wait to see what all you end up putting on your ornament hangers and the different trims and braids and wonderful things that you find to use for them. So I've now taken 2 stitches through my small bicone. I've anchored it with another stitch through my braid, and I'm working up towards my next bicone. So I am going to repeat the process all the way up this side and then come back to you and show you how I do the top. Okay, so at this point I have attached all of my bicones on this side of the hanger, and now I'm going to work my way up across the top until I get to my next side here. So for here, it's useful to find the middle point of your hanger and about judge just visually. This is not an exact technique, just eyeball it. So for example, these aren't exact matches. I decided to put an extra small bicone up here instead of the large one. So you're going to find about your halfway point, judge about how far you want to start and stop on each side, and then you're just going to keep on stitching your way through that stretch of cord. And here you can lengthen your stitches because this is the hidden part of your ornament. This is going to be on a tree branch or a hook or wherever you are going to hang your ornament. This will not be visible. So if your stitches are a little larger in this section, you are not going to see it, and it's a great place to save thread. Because one thing I forgot to mention is that this technique works best if you can do the entire hanger with one length of thread for strength. Start and stop points with beads are weak points, and these crystals really do have a surprising amount of weight to it. So for strength, you really want to have your entire ornament hanger worked with one length of sewing thread. I ended up cutting my length a little short here, so I'm taking almost basting stitches through my top here to try and make sure that I have plenty of thread for the other side. So I am going to work back to my starting point on the next side and then come back to you. Okay, so I've stitched my thread around the top here, and even though I was taking quite long stitches to save thread, you can see how it really sinks into the braid, and it's not going to be at all noticeable, especially once it's hanging on a tree. That's one of the reasons I like this particular pairing of 103 thread and the Embellished metallic braid so much. It really effectively disguises this technique. Here on my original ornament, I had a longer length of thread to work with. I took shorter stitches, and you can see how they are really almost invisible. They're there, but only just barely. So I've worked across the top. That's my center point. This is where I am starting. And now I'm going to put another short bicone on and start this side of the ornament. So for this, I'm just going to completely mirror my process on the other side. Key points are always to make sure that you're taking 2 stitches through every bead or pendant to make sure that it's firmly anchored, that it is easier to get through. Ooh. Yeah, it would help if you actually took your stitch through the bead and not just through your loop. Wow, I'm having a day here. Okay, so this time I'm going to make sure I actually pick up the hole in my bicone pendant, trying to get my second stitch through my bead. That you can keep your stitches a little looser or tighter depending on how you want them to hang off your cord. And then you need to make sure that you're always taking your thread through the center of the cord. You're stitching through it, and that's what anchors your stitches, gives them strength, and makes sure that your beads don't fall off. The other point which I wanted to review is that this is easier to do if you're holding your ornament hanger taut or semi-taut, and then that makes it easier to find and stitch through the center of the cord. So I am going to finish adding the pendants on my right side, then come back to you and show how I finish this ornament off. Okay, so I have stitched on my right side bicones. I've taken my thread all the way down to the corner of the braid where it meets the ornament, and I'm ready to end my thread. As you can see, I barely made it. So another critical point about this technique is work with as long a length of sewing thread as you can manage, because you really don't want to have to change your thread with this, or just use a shorter ornament hanger. And then another point I'd like to note is that irregularity is your friend here. A little bit of irregular spacing, alternating kinds of beads can really make for a very charming ornament hanger. These are going to twist and turn when they're on the tree, and so having irregular spacing, I think, really adds to the effect. It makes it look like your ornament has fabulous frosted icicles on it or something. I just love it. I can't wait to experiment with more variations on this. So to finish off my thread, I'm here through the center of the braid, right at the corner where it meets the linen. And to anchor it, I'm going to take a stitch into the linen and come up at the back where I have, unfortunately for this ornament, already attached my backing, and it's trying to snag on all of my pendants, so watch that as well. Don't want to knot this. There we go. And now I've pulled it through. So my ending is going to be a little different just because I have already put my backing on. That's not really ideal. If you had your backing off and you came down, you'd bring it down through the corner into the linen, and then you'd take several tacking stitches here in your back that's going to be covered by your backing. It's a lot easier to end it off. But since I've already got mine on and I'm too lazy to cut it off and then stitch it on again, I am going to take my tacking stitches and try and bury them. So I'm just taking a small straight stitch and then going across so that these will effectively disappear. You want to make sure that you have several stitches to end with because you want your beads to be really, really secure so that your thread doesn't eventually pull loose. So in this case, I've come out on the satin and I'm going to come back in, taking a bite of the linen, come up here at the corner, go into the satin. So I'm taking plenty of extra stitches here just to be really, really super careful. You don't want all of your work to go to waste and pull out on you. So I'm basically just taking as many tacking stitches as I have thread for. So I'm going to come through my satin. I'm just going back and forth across the corner here because that's a really easy way to bury your stitches if you've already got a back on here. But as I said, this is much easier to do if you don't. So then I am going to come out here at the linen. It's my final stitch. Give everything a tug. Yeah, that's really secure. And then just clip right at the base with my scissors to end my thread. That gives me my fabulous sparkle prim embellished ornament hanger. So I hope that you will give this technique a try and share with me all the wonderful variations that you come up with, because using different kinds of trim for your ornament hanger, different kinds of embellishments, beads or charms instead of crystal pendants, all of that would add a lot to your finish, and you can base your embellishment and your trim choices off the subject of your ornament to try and better suit it. So I really looked forward to seeing what you come up with. Please share your finishes with me, and happy stitching.